Good evening from New York. President Obama went to George Washington University this afternoon to offer his own roadmap for deficit reduction. The plan aims to reduce our deficit by $4 trillion over the next 12 years. He proposed cutting $2 trillion from spending, $1 trillion from taxes, including ending the Bush-era tax breaks for the wealthy, and the rest, the other trillion, would be recouped from lower interest payments on the national debt. In his forceful rejection of the Republican budget plan written by Congressman Paul Ryan, the president managed to invoke Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan's own budget director said there's nothing serious or courageous about this plan. There's nothing serious about a plan that claims to reduce the deficit by spending $1 trillion on tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. And I don't think there's anything courageous about asking for sacrifice from those who can least afford it and don't have any clout on Capitol Hill. That's not a vision of the America I know.
And so the gauntlet was thrown, which then included a veto threat of specific portions of the Ryan plan. But the president began his speech with what he thought was the unifying theme of what we all agree on.
From our first days as a nation, we have put our faith in free markets and free enterprise as the engine of America's wealth and prosperity. And more than citizens of any other country, we are rugged individualists, a self-reliant people with a healthy skepticism of too much government.
This is an illusion, of course. We are not the rugged individualists we think we are. After getting an education paid for by the government, if we live long enough, we all get retirement income from the government and health care paid for by the government. That is a very healthy dose of good old-fashioned socialism, but we remain the country that pretends to hate socialism. Homeowners and the entire real estate industry float on a massive government subsidy written into the tax code called the mortgage deduction. The federal government gives millionaires and billionaires tens of thousands of dollars a year, $50,000, to pay for their housing, a subsidy that none of them need. And yet our rugged individualist self-image continues.
But there's always been another thread running through our history. A belief that we're all connected, and that there are some things we can only do together as a nation. Part of this American belief that we're all connected also expresses itself in a conviction that each one of us deserves some basic measure of security and dignity.
And here, the president, thinking he was still on the stuff we can all agree on, lost about half of his audience. What he just said is something only Democrats agree on now. The Tea Party and the Republican Party do not believe that we are all connected or that each one of us deserves some basic measure of security and dignity, especially if that security includes health care security for each one of us. Republicans voted against extending health care security to more Americans last year, and they did so largely acting on their actual beliefs, their beliefs that each of us does not deserve a basic measure of security and human dignity.
We recognize that no matter how responsibly we live our lives, hard times or bad luck, a crippling illness or a layoff may strike any one of us. There, but for the grace of God, go I, we say to ourselves. And so we contribute to programs like Medicare and Social Security, which guarantee us health care and a measure of basic income after a lifetime of hard work. Unemployment insurance, which protects us against unexpected job loss. And Medicaid, which provides care for millions of seniors in nursing homes, poor children, those with disabilities. We're a better country because of these commitments. I'll go further. We would not be a great country without those commitments.
True, we are a better country because of those commitments, but much of the country, many of the voters who vote for Republican presidents and Republican Congresses do not believe that. They think we are a weaker country because we give money to people who don't work. We call it unemployment insurance. They call it a government handout and wonder why the unemployed don't just all start their own businesses.
There, but for the grace of God, go I, we say to ourselves. And so we contribute to programs like Medicare and Social Security.
There, but for the grace of God, go I. I learned that phrase as a child, but I've never before heard it as the rationale for Medicare and Social Security. I imagine Medicare and Social Security are logical extensions of the concept enunciated in that phrase. There, but for the grace of God, go I. But we live in a country where probably half of the people who use that phrase mean, God, am I lucky that didn't happen to me? And most of those people believe that it didn't happen to them because they've made smarter choices than the unemployed, or they've worked harder than the people who don't have health insurance, or they are simply better people than the homeless, better people than the least of their brethren. Because the president and perhaps elected Democrats generally do not understand that much of the time about half the country does not share these basic Christian values and Democratic Party values, they then don't understand why they are now playing desperate political defense against a so far highly effective assault on every thread of the social safety net that Democrats have created in the last 75 years. The president told the story of how he thinks we got here.
Our leaders came together 3 times during the 1990s to reduce our nation's deficit. 3 times. They forged historic agreements that required tough decisions made by the first President Bush, then made by President Clinton, by Democratic Congresses, and by a Republican Congress. All 3 agreements asked for shared responsibility and shared sacrifice. But they largely protected the middle class. They largely protected our commitment to seniors. They protected our key investments in our future. As a result of these bipartisan efforts, America's finances were in great shape by the year 2000. We went from deficit to surplus. America was actually on track to becoming completely debt-free, and we were prepared for the retirement of the baby boomers. But after Democrats and Republicans committed to fiscal discipline during the 1990s, we lost our way in the decade that followed. We increased spending dramatically for 2 wars and an expensive prescription drug program. But we didn't pay for any of this new spending.
Well, Democrats may have lost their way, but conservative Republicans never did.
But you know, we can lecture our children about extravagance until we run out of voice and breath. Or we can cure their extravagance by simply reducing their allowance.
Reducing their allowance. If you're a conservative Republican, you can reduce the government's allowance by cutting taxes. Then you sit by and watch the Democrats try to preserve their spending programs when they don't have the money to do it. And so the Democrats, who couldn't stop Republicans from cutting taxes, then join the Republicans in cutting spending. Starve the beast was the phrase thrown around in the Reagan White House. The beast being the federal government. Starve it. Cut taxes. Don't collect the money the government needs to run its programs, and those programs will then have to be cut. This has been the Republican strategy since Reagan. It is the Republican strategy today. If you don't understand that it is the Republican strategy, then you do not understand what you're up against.
In the last decade, if we had simply found a way to pay for the tax cuts and the prescription drug benefit, our deficit would currently be at low historical levels in the coming years.
If we had simply found a way to pay for those things, the Republicans had no intention of finding a way to pay for the Medicare prescription drug benefit or the tax cuts. Had they done that, there would not be today a Republican-led discussion about dismantling the federal government.
We have to live within our means. We have to reduce our deficit, and we have to get back on a path that will allow us to pay down our debt.
And there, the Democratic president is saying exactly what Republicans planned for a Democratic president to say if by chance one of them was lucky enough to be elected. That plan, The Reagan plan, the Starve the Beast plan, controls our governing dialogue today. This is not an accidental legacy of Reagan's. This was his plan. This didn't happen because George W. Bush lost his way and forgot to pay for things. It was because George W. Bush faithfully executed the plan.
The America I know is generous and compassionate. It's a land of opportunity and optimism. Yes, we take responsibility for ourselves, but we also take responsibility for each other.